Hey folks, Ben Shapiro here. Welcome to Scamala, Kamala Harris Unmasked. This series is exactly why Daily Wire Plus exists and why your membership is so crucial. We're bringing you the unvarnished truth about Kamala Harris that the mainstream media are too cowardly to touch. This is the kind of hard-hitting, fact-based content that's missing in today's media landscape. While the left-wing outlets spin their narratives, we're committed to giving you the real story, no matter whom it offends. Your support allows us to create content that matters, content that gives you the facts and the truth no one else will because of their own agendas. We're not beholden to corporate interests or political parties. We answer to you, our members. This fight for truth is more important now than ever before. With Scamala, we're not just exposing one politician. We're challenging the entire corrupt system that props up incompetent leaders and radical ideologies. If you believe in honest journalism, if you're tired of the mainstream media's lies, and if you want to be part of the solution, then join us. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe and become a member today. Let's continue this fight together. The truth matters, and with your help, we'll make sure it's heard. Now, let's dive into Scamala, Kamala Harris Unmasked, and see what the left doesn't want you to know. Meet Kamala Harris. You know her, of course. She's the Vice President of the United States, the historic first black female vice president. Since Joe Biden chose Kamala as his vice presidential candidate in 2020, he has touted her as a co-partner in this administration.
I will be a full partner to the president-elect and the president, and whatever our priorities are, I will be there to support him and support the American people.
She was put in charge of the border crisis. She has substituted for Joe Biden at international conferences on Ukraine. She has sat in on phone calls with foreign leaders. She has globetrotted to push the administration's agenda on everything from climate change to the economy to race in America. And yet, Kamala Harris is largely perceived as a joke by the American public, a figure straight from Veep.
My fellow Americans, words have many meanings, and sometimes instead of conveying our meaning, they can suggest other meanings.
We are the United States of America because we are united.
Whatever we have in store cannot be known.
There is a reason for that. Harris's awkward laughter has become the unofficial accompaniment to the administration's myriad foibles.
Poor hubby. Poor hubby.
Her bizarre word salads have become a late-night comedy fodder.
Right? The significance of the passage of time.
What can be, unburdened by what has been. What can be, unburdened by what has been.
And as always, Wakanda forever.
Kamala is, in the public mind, according to polling data, incompetent, unqualified, an idiot. But all of this sells Kamala Harris short. Kamala Harris has been in public life for 4 decades. In that time, she has conned her way from obscurity to deputy district attorney, from there to San Francisco district attorney, from there to California attorney general, from there to the United States Senate, and finally to the vice presidency. Kamala Harris's story is one of corruption and of failing up, of lies and betrayals, of dishonesty and incompetence. Kamala Harris is not merely incompetent or unqualified or foolish, though. She is dangerous. That danger is often obscured by her awkward persona.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Nails on the bottom, go round and round.
But that persona hasn't been an obstacle to her rise. Now, Kamala Harris is a hair's breadth from the Oval Office. But how did she get here? How did someone with such a knack for failure manage to climb the greasy pole to the precipice of the most powerful position in the world? In this documentary podcast, we're peeling back the layers of Kamala Harris's career, exposing the scandals, the missteps, and the awkwardness that have come to define her journey, and exposing her radicalism too. Because here's the ugly truth. Kamala Harris is utterly and radically inauthentic, a person without any central conviction except the desire for power. And if the story of Kamala Harris tells us anything, it's that in America, unbridled ambition, combined with a complete lack of principle, can take you just about anywhere, even to the White House.
My mother used to have a very funny story about I was fussing and she said, Kamala, what do you want? And I said, and this is how she would say it. And she said, Kamala, what do you want? And I said, freedom.
No. That's Kamala Harris on Jimmy Fallon's show in 2021. And it's one of her favorite stories. In fact, she told it to Elle magazine in October 2020 as well. Unfortunately, that story doesn't appear to be Kamala's. It appears that Kamala plagiarized it from Martin Luther King Jr., who wrote in 1965, quote, I will never forget a moment in Birmingham when a white policeman accosted a little Negro girl, 7 or 8 years old, who was walking in a demonstration with her mother. What do you want? The policeman asked her gruffly. And the little girl looked at him straight in the eye and answered, feed him. It's a small but telling example of Kamala Harris's constant attempts to reshape and remold her own history. But what lies at the core of the real Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris was born on October 20th, 1964, to Donald Harris, a Marxist economist from Jamaica, and Scamala, a breast cancer researcher from India. Like Barack Obama, Kamala was not an American descendant of slavery. Both of her parents would earn PhDs from UC Berkeley. They would go on to divorce when she was 7. She was largely raised by her mother. Religiously, she also grew up going to Hindu church. Her mother told the Los Angeles Times in 2004, quote, "A culture that worships goddesses produces strong women. She performs all rituals and says all prayers at the temple. My family always wanted the children to learn the traditions irrespective of their place of birth." Kamala grew up in the uber-liberal enclave of Berkeley for a few years from 1970 to 1976. Later, of course, Kamala would claim to have been victimized by segregation, most famously in her second presidential debate when she targeted Joe Biden.
We've also heard, and I'm going to now direct this at Vice President Biden, to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. You also worked with them to oppose busing. You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
When Kamala was 12, she moved with her mother and sister to Montreal, Canada. There, she went to school at the private Catholic school Notre Dame de Neiges, then Westmount High School. According to the New York Times, quote, "Eventually the family settled on the top floor of a spacious Victorian home in an affluent neighborhood bordering Westmount, one of Canada's wealthiest districts." According to one of Kamala's classmates, students at her school were more divided, quote, "about who had the latest Jordache jeans than about race." In other words, Kamala certainly did not grow up in the face of widespread and sinister American racism. She spent her most formative years in Canada. Nonetheless, after high school, Kamala went to college at Howard University, a historically black university. She chose Howard because, as she later told the Washington Post, when you're at an HBCU, and especially one with the size and with the history of Howard University, and also in the context of also being in DC, which was known forever as being Chocolate City, it just becomes about you understanding that there is a whole world of people who are like you. It's not just about there are a few of us who may find each other. She was searching for an identity, and she found one, becoming a social justice activist as soon as she got there. According to the Post, quote, "She spent many weekends protesting against apartheid in South Africa on the Mall in Washington, D.C., and she took part in a 1983 sit-in of an administration building to protest the expulsion of the student newspaper's editor." After attending Howard, Kamala went to the University of California Hastings College of Law. She interned at the Alameda County District Attorney's Office between 2nd and 3rd year at law school, as well as becoming president of the National Black Law Students Association. She failed her first attempt at the California bar, later making the excuse she hadn't properly studied. Nonetheless, she latched on at the District Attorney's Office as a deputy prosecutor. And Kamala's career might well have ended there, as a local prosecutor. But then, in 1994, she met someone very important, Speaker of the California Assembly, Willie Brown. Willie Brown had entered the California State Assembly in 1964, the same year Kamala was born. He was 60 years old when they began dating, Kamala a mere 29. Brown was a famous womanizer who led a separate life from his wife and apparently had done so since 1980. Bill Clinton called him the real Slick Willie. Brown was a California political kingmaker, looking for a new gig after Speaker of the Assembly. He wanted to run for mayor of San Francisco. And Kamala was, to put it mildly, a woman on the make. Within months, Brown wasn't just squiring around Kamala publicly, introducing her to all the important people in California culture and politics. He was actually appointing her to public positions, taxpayer-funded public positions. First, he appointed her to the California Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board, a position that compensated her $97,000 annually. That would be about $205,000 today. She left after 6 months, but he then appointed her to the California Medical Assistance Commission, which paid her over $70,000 per year, about $150,000 today. As the Washington Examiner reports, the commission met just twice per month. Kamala still missed 1/5 of all the meetings. Kamala herself was the youngest member of the board by 30 years. Brown sent her a letter stating, quote, "I am confident that your knowledge and experience will contribute significantly to the important work of the commission." At the time, she had zero experience in health or medicine, despite the fact that the committee was supposed to be, quote, "selected from persons with experience in management of hospital services, risk management insurance or prepaid health programs, the delivery of health services, the management of county health systems, and a representative of recipients of service." We'll get to more on that in a moment. First, are you still struggling with back taxes or unfiled returns? Nearly 1 in 4 Americans owe back taxes. And the worst thing you can do is ignore the problem as penalties pile up, interest accumulates, and the IRS loses patience. Handling this alone can be a huge mistake and cost you thousands of dollars. So I think your best offense is Tax Network USA. With over 14 years of experience, the experts at Tax Network USA have saved clients millions in back taxes. Regardless of the size of your tax issue, their expertise is your advantage. Tax Network USA offers 3 key services: protection, compliance, and settlement. Upon signing up, Tax Network USA will immediately contact the IRS to secure a protection order, ensuring that aggressive collection activities like garnishments, levies, or property seizures are halted. Even if you haven't filed in a while, Tax Network USA's expert tax preparers will update all your filings to eliminate the risk of IRS enforcement. Then, they'll create a settlement strategy to reduce or completely eliminate your tax debt. The IRS is the largest collection agency on planet Earth, and since tax season is over, collection season has begun. Talk to my friends at Tax Network USA. Call today 1-800-245-6000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's 1-800-245-6000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro today. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. Former Republican California State Assemblyman Brett Grunland told the Examiner, quote, "Both boards are reserved for political payback or occasionally for personal rewards for personal service." Personal service indeed. As Kamala's mother would later tell the press, quote, "Why shouldn't she have gone out with Willie Brown? He was a player. Brown didn't just provide a public pension to his lover, he also familiarized her with the top players in the state." As journalist Charlie Spearing writes in his political biography of Kamala, Amateur Hour, quote, "Brown and Harris only dated for about a year, but he made a foundational impact on her political and financial future. In his last year as California's Speaker of the Assembly, Brown appointed his new girlfriend to 2 positions in state government that, all told, paid her more than $400,000 over 5 years. Brown also gave Harris the keys to a BMW. As Brown's girlfriend, Harris was featured in all the gossip and high society columns as Brown worked the city for his campaign for mayor. Brown has publicly acknowledged how much he helped her in her early years. Yes, we dated. It was more than 20 years ago," he wrote in 2019. "Yes, I may have influenced her career by appointing her to 2 state commissions when I was Assembly Speaker, and I certainly helped with her first race for District Attorney in San Francisco. I've also helped the careers of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Governor Gavin Newsom, Senator Dianne Feinstein, and a host of other politicians." He does not note, however, that he never had sex with Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, or Dianne Feinstein, we presume. Kamala was not just another fling for Willie Brown. Some people around him thought it was serious. Herb Cain, a San Francisco Chronicle reporter who also happened to be Willie Brown's best friend, wrote a lot about his relationship with Kamala. In a June 19, 1995 report, Cain wrote that Brown had, quote, "given up girls in favor of a woman, Kamala Harris, who's exactly the steadying influence he needs." In a December 14, 1995 piece on Brown's victory party, Cain referred to Kamala as the, quote, "first lady in waiting." He reported that the hat Brown wore celebrating with "Da Mayor" written on it in all caps was a gift from Kamala.
But as the mayor!
But then, 11 days later, on the day after Christmas, Cain wrote the newly elected mayor was putting the word out it was over with Kamala. He said the breakup was shocking and flabbergasted aides, who viewed Kamala as the perfect antidote to his playboy tendencies. So, what happened? For that, you need to look in Willie Brown's own autobiography, Basic Brown. Without mentioning Kamala by name, he says his actual wife, Blanche Vitero, put her foot down once she saw the reports about how serious things were with Kamala. In the book, Brown writes that while Blanche, quote, "usually maintained her cool about his philandering, every once in a while she made it clear who was boss." After Blanche read an item in Herb Cain's column that implied a girlfriend of mine and I were going to get married, this is what she said to a friend, quote, "Listen, she may have him at the moment, but come Inauguration Day and he's up there on the platform being sworn in, I'll be holding the Bible." That's from Willie Brown himself. Why was he scared of his wife? Well, in the book, he also writes that she was a high priestess in Haitian voodoo religion. So maybe it was that. But more importantly, any notion this wasn't an affair because Brown and his wife were long estranged seems to be undercut by Brown himself. They broke up because Willie Brown was married. And maybe that explains the animosity Kamala clearly still has. Brown wouldn't leave his voodoo priestess wife to make Kamala San Francisco's first lady. As Spearing points out in his book, Kamala still refuses to acknowledge her debt to her former lover. Later in her career, as she ran for San Francisco District Attorney, with his help, she insisted, quote, "His career is over. I will be alive and kicking for the next 40 years. I do not owe him a thing. If there is corruption, it will be prosecuted." Kamala doesn't mention Willie Brown once in her autobiography. In 1998, San Francisco District Attorney Terrence Hallinan hired the now 33-year-old Kamala. She was to be paid some $100,000 per year, almost $200,000 in today's dollars. Hallinan called her a terrific prosecutor with a great reputation. He also insisted he had not spoken with Willie Brown about her hiring until it was all done. Sure. The next year, despite questions about Hallinan's far-left progressive prosecutorial style, Brown backed Hallinan. Kamala, though, quickly became disillusioned with her lack of power in the prosecutor's office. She tried to get Hallinan's chief deputy fired. When she failed in August 2000, she moved to the city attorney's office and set her sights on defenestrating her former boss. Kamala's next ambitious move would be the betrayal of the man who hired her at the San Francisco District Attorney's office. Just 3 months after she moved offices, in October 2000, Willie Brown began publicly criticizing Hallinan. paving the way for the Kamala Harris for DA campaign.
And I made a very conscious and deliberate decision to become a prosecutor, understanding that it is some of the most vulnerable people in our community who are impacted by the criminal justice system.
Kamala turned on Hallinan as soft on crime and tried to make the case that she would be far harsher on criminals than Hallinan had. She went out of her way to slam Hallinan's refusal to prosecute thousands who had rioted over the Iraq War. She slammed Hallinan as a man willing to let murderers off the hook. She accused Hallinan of, quote, lying to us about his domestic violence record, adding, "Women are dying because of it." As we'll see, this was merely rhetoric. In office, Kamala would follow Hallinan's San Francisco prosecutorial model herself. Hallinan struck back by pointing out Kamala's relationship with Brown. In response, Kamala threw Willie Brown under the bus, undoubtedly with his tacit permission. As the Los Angeles Times would later report, quote, Brown, the outgoing mayor, less than universally loved at the end of his second term, kept his public role minimal. But his stamp of approval was crucial in raising money from the San Francisco establishment, said Aaron Peskin, a Board of Supervisors member who backed Harris. Kamala wasn't above skirting the line either. As the Times reported, quote, the City Ethics Commission fined Harris $34,000 for breaching a spending cap she promised to honor, and her campaign manager was caught impersonating a volunteer for a rival in a bungled attempt to gain inside information.
She's already accumulated half a dozen misdemeanors, the highest fine in the history of the San Francisco Ethics Commission, and committed violation after violation of our ethics code.
But Kamala Harris did win.
For the city and county of San Francisco.
Congratulations.
After winning, as has been the consistent pattern throughout her career, Kamala immediately embarked on a campaign for higher office. This involved two simultaneous goals. First, catering to her radical left-wing base. Second, acting tough on crime. Now, there's no easy way to square those two goals, unless you're willing to lie. And that's precisely what Kamala did. In her inaugural speech, she promised to be smart on crime. By smart, she meant dishonest. First, she sought to cater to her left-wing base. Kamala had campaigned as an opponent of the death penalty, and she held to that even after the April 2004 murder of police officer Isaac Espinoza by a gang member. Quote, we have thoroughly reviewed the facts and the law in this case, said Kamala. It was a complicated analysis that involved many issues, many facts, and many laws. It wasn't. She just didn't want a death penalty case on her record, despite the protestations of then-Senator Dianne Feinstein. Kamala also avoided seeking the death penalty for an illegal immigrant gang member who committed a triple homicide. It simply wouldn't do to look too right-wing in going after murderers, even if she had criticized her predecessor for just that sort of conciliatory approach to homicide. Kamala also reversed herself on her critique of Hallinan regarding the Iraq War rioters. She ended up letting all of them off the hook. Her office was responsible for the release on probation of a suspect who would murder a prominent Oakland journalist. She refused to prosecute criminals under California's so-called three-strike law unless the final felony was violent. It turns out her campaign as a smart crime fighter was just a facade for the reality, more San Francisco leftism. But somehow Kamala also had to appear tough on crime, at least tough enough to run for Attorney General of California. And so she began falsifying her prosecutorial statistics. Now, there are two ways of increasing your conviction rates as a prosecutor. First, you can actually increase the number of convictions out of the number of trials. You can be a better prosecutor. Second, you can decrease the number of trials altogether while holding the number of convictions steady. Give a bunch of cases easy plea bargains. Kamala, of course, went with strategy number 2. As Charlie Spearing reports, quote, of the backlog of 73 homicide cases on Hallinan's watch, Harris cut a deal for 32 of them and only convicted 15 of the defendants for murder. Police officers didn't understand why cases were being dropped, but the answer was obvious. Fewer cases you need to prosecute means fewer cases you need to win to keep your conviction rate up. Kamala continued to take both sides of nearly every issue during her time as San Francisco DA. She refused to prosecute prostitution, but opposed decriminalization. She supported legalizing medical pot, but also supported federal officers arresting distributors. She tried to prosecute a schizophrenic woman who was injured by the police after attacking officers. Most famously, she began arguing she could lock up parents of truant children.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy.
Later, of course, she would argue she never actually imprisoned parents, but that's not what she was bragging about at the time, trying to be top cop. Her incompetence nearly exploded into the open in 2010 when a member of her office emailed a colleague about an increasingly undependable crime lab technician. That crime lab technician, Deborah Madden, wasn't merely undependable, it turned out. She was criminal. She had tampered with cocaine and stolen some of it. A court found that Kamala, quote, failed to produce exculpatory information actually in her possession regarding Madden and the crime lab. The court blasted Kamala for significant errors and misjudgments. Hundreds of cases were affected. Kamala would herself dismiss some 1,000 drug-related cases in order to get the scandal off the books. Once again, she was willing to let hundreds of criminals onto the streets in order to cut short the terrible headlines. All of this time, Kamala's eyes were on the next rung on the political ladder, State Attorney General. To achieve that office, Kamala would have to increase her name brand, and the media were prepared to help her out.
Now to a woman named one of America's most powerful women by Newsweek magazine as San Francisco's first female African-American and Indian-American district attorney. Kamala Harris has received praise for raising conviction rates against violent criminals while creating innovative programs to reduce crime and prevent repeat offenders. Do you have ambitions for national office?
And now, it's one step at a time. And I'm a career prosecutor. I really believe that California has the ability, as that old adage says, so goes California, goes the rest of the country.
Now, if you were to watch that interview with Matt Lauer, you'd think Kamala Harris had been wildly successful in San Francisco. But in reality, her tenure was a failure, with low conviction rates and, according to her opponents, the highest homicide and robbery rates in the state. Nonetheless, celebrity power triumphed. Kamala won the primary. She then moved on to the general election against Republican Steve Cooley, DA for Los Angeles. Cooley promptly hit the nail on the head, pointing out she had no intention of remaining Attorney General for the state, that she had her eyes on higher office. For Kamala's part, she wasn't exactly hiding the ball. She recruited high-profile supporters, including President Barack Obama. Her relationship with Obama would later become a crucial component in her rise. In the end, Kamala pulled out an incredibly close race, winning by just 0.8%. As California AG, Kamala was quickly hailed as one of the nation's most important women. Her star was rising, and the media were burnishing it.
38-year-old Kamala Harris came out of nowhere and was swept into office as San Francisco's district attorney. And as she did, she made history. She's the first woman ever to be the city's top prosecutor.
We take a look at a woman that many are calling the female Barack Obama.
With a 90% conviction rate, superstar prosecutor Kamala Harris made history when she was elected California's first African-American female district attorney.
Barack Obama in particular gave Kamala high praise, calling her the nation's best-looking attorney general.
Mr. Obama praised California Attorney General Kamala Harris. But then Mr. Obama added, she also happens to be by far the best-looking attorney general in the country.
The resulting media melee, which Kamala no doubt enjoyed, forced Obama to issue a half-hearted apology. Certainly Kamala wasn't offended. She spoke at the 2012 Democratic National Convention in Obama's favor, raising her profile too.
The American dream belongs to all of us. And if we can work together and stand together and vote together on November 6th for President Barack Obama, that's a dream we will put within reach of all our people.
How worshipful was the press to Kamala, this new rising star? Maxim magazine named her the 54th hottest woman in the world in 2013, beating out Brooklyn Decker, Emmy Rossum, Amelia Clark, and Jessica Chastain. Obviously, Kamala was on the rise. She was just as obviously dishonest. Kamala knew she'd still have to play both sides of the table to preserve her campaign for higher office. To that end, she pretended to act as a tough-on-crime top cop, cut deals where she had to, and she played to a radical base at the same time. And in California, she got away with it. In 2012, Kamala came under scrutiny from her left for cutting a deal with the banks after the housing meltdown of 2008. She refused to prosecute One West for predatory lending. This led to criticisms of cronyism from the left, given that key investors included Kamala donors like Steve Mnuchin and George Soros. She also fell under the spotlight after her office made the argument that prisoners slated for release due to prison overcrowding had to be maintained to provide a labor pool for the prisons. Quote, extending 2-for-1 credits to all minimum custody inmates at this time would severely impact fire camp participation, a dangerous outcome while California is in the middle of a difficult fire season and severe drought, her office wrote. When that news broke, Kamala pretended to be shocked. After all, who could expect the Attorney General to read the paperwork her own office was filing? Meanwhile, Kamala even took a position against cash bail and defended death penalty cases in court, despite her prior opposition to the death penalty as a DA in San Francisco. Now that her eyes were on the national level, she knew she'd have to distance herself at least a little from the San Francisco radical left. But Kamala also played to that left. She infamously refused to defend the will of California voters in the courts in 2012, when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals moved to discard Proposition 8, California's referendum enshrining male-female marriage as the only legal standard for marriage in the state. The night the proposition was killed by the Ninth Circuit, she herself officiated a same-sex wedding ceremony.
I now declare you spouses for life.
This amounted to a fundamental betrayal of her office. The Attorney General of a state doesn't simply get to overrule the people of that state by refusing to defend the law, but Kamala did, and she was celebrated for it. All was well in Kamala land, and it was about to get even better. In 2014, at the ripe old age of 49, just in time for her next political step, she married a wealthy lawyer named Doug Emhoff. As stepmom to Emhoff's 2 children, she began calling herself Mamala. Kamala easily won re-election as Attorney General. Then, in January 2015, Senator Barbara Boxer announced she would leave office. That left the door wide open to Kamala, by far the most prominent Democrat in the race. Not only that, California had recently changed its laws so that the top two candidates in an open primary would face each other in the senatorial election. That meant for the first time, no Republican would appear on the final ballot at all, meaning that Kamala only had to be the most popular Democrat in the state to walk into the Senate. All the stars were aligning. But Kamala would use her final few months as Attorney General to polish her left-wing bona fides. In April 2016, she targeted David DeLayden and Sandra Merritt, pro-life activists who had the temerity to report on the selling of baby body parts by Planned Parenthood. Meanwhile, she was touting Planned Parenthood on her own website. As Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of Susan B. Anthony List, said, quote, "The fact that Ms. Harris is seizing private property of a pro-life California activist who has exposed horrific practices conducted by Planned Parenthood, which donated thousands to her last campaign, while her Senate campaign promotes and defends them, the nation's largest abortion provider, is a conflict of interest and abuse of government power." DeLayden stated, quote, "This is no surprise. Planned Parenthood's bought and paid for AG has steadfastly refused to enforce the law against the baby body parts traffickers in our state or even investigate them, while at the same time doing their bidding to harass and intimidate citizen journalists. We will pursue all remedies to vindicate our First Amendment rights." In May 2020, DeLayden filed suit against Kamala for civil rights violations. No matter, Kamala's 2016 Senate campaign was a wrong. It required no serious campaign infrastructure, given that no Republican was running against her. It also required no discipline. As The Atlantic reported in December 2015, Kamala was, quote, "the Senate candidate driving Democrats crazy." According to The Atlantic, quote, "one stay, one hotel, $1,886. That's how much Kamala Harris's campaign spent this March to put up the California Senate candidate at Washington's luxurious St. Regis Hotel. A review of the Harris campaign's Federal Election Commission reports reveals it was far from a one-time splurge. In June, the campaign spent $1,500 to house Harris for a night at Houston's posh Houstonian Hotel. In July, it was another night at the St. Regis, this time for $1,600. In Chicago, it was the Waldorf Astoria. In Boston, the Four Seasons. And on 4 occasions this year, Harris's campaign paid for rooms at the pricey W Hotel in Los Angeles. The total price tag for these first-class accommodations, almost $18,000. Campaigns typically shell out big bucks on media buys, staff salaries, and expensive fundraisers. But spending it on housing, particularly when far cheaper options are available, is atypical, campaign veterans say, and even Harris's fellow Democrats have taken notice. But Kamala Harris was, in her own eyes, a star, and she deserved star treatment.
Kamala's for our schools. Kamala's for affordable childcare. That's Kamala. Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris for Senate.
Kamala's bad campaign habits didn't cost her anything in 2016, but they would come back to bite her down the road. For now, though, Kamala's star was on the rise. Kamala Harris had gone from California bar failure to California senator, from Willie Brown's lover to Barbara Boxer's seat, and Senator Kamala Harris had her eyes on just one target, the 2020 presidential election.